Welcome to another episode of Grieving Voices. If this is your first time listening, thank you for being here. And if you've listened before, thank you for coming back. Today, my guest is Susan Snow. She is an author, international speaker, and resiliency coach. Her message of hope and healing through trauma and loss comes from her vulnerability, which allows others a safe space to tell their own story of trauma and loss. And thank you so much for your time and being here today and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
And your book title is very to the point. Can you share that story, please? But also, I have a follow-up question to the book title. So,
Sure, absolutely. Well, the book came out, and that title was specific because I am the daughter of a Los Angeles police detective who was ambushed while picking up my then 6-year-old brother on Halloween of 1985. And my mom and I were called to the school and witnessed his body in the aftermath. So the other side of the gun, um, it was my side. It was my side of what gun violence, takes away from you, without getting political. It was more on the mental health side.
and when this happened, you were 17 on the
Yeah,
cusp of adulthood.
yeah.
And so I imagine, I mean, you're old enough to recognize that what happened, right? And process what happened to some degree.
I really struggled. This was the 80s. It was mid
Mhm.
80s. There was no talk of mental health back then. And there definitely was very little known about PTSD. What I witnessed was horrific. And I didn't know how to process. And unfortunately, um, that night was so chaotic. There was just so much going on. And when we showed up, there was so much going on, but we still didn't know until we actually saw the scene. All I saw were officers coming towards me with tears in their eyes. Um, and I didn't know what that meant. I mean, even when I'm the one that received the call at home, I was getting ready to go to a Halloween party, or hoping to go to a Halloween party, and it was a weeknight. So my dad had already said, nope, not doing it. But I was bound and determined, being 17, and I got that call from a woman from my brother's school. And all she said was there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. So even at that point, I didn't know what to expect when we arrived at the school. And even that night, after I witnessed what I witnessed, the officers, my mom was screaming, and I I was focused on an ambulance that was stood still in the street. And I couldn't understand why they weren't helping my dad. I just, it was not processing at all that what I was seeing was that he was gone. Um, it was a very surreal kind of feeling, like an out of body experience, kind of. Um, and then when we got into the school, we went into an office, and I sat down, and my mom was kind of ushered out of the room. I believe with some detectives. I didn't know where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt, if he was at the hospital. Like, I knew nothing. And as I was sitting there, there were two ladies that were talking. And the one said to the other, yes, unfortunately, Mr. Williams is deceased. And that's when it hit me and my world cracked. And I just wanted to run out of there. I talk to a lot of people who have had loss, and this seems to be kind of a feeling of, I just want to run away from this nightmare. Um, especially when it's something that happens and occurs quickly. Um, you just want to run. And I wanted to run and run and run and run and not stop. But my legs were like cement. I couldn't move, physically could not move. And my mom came back into the room and she said, I'm sending you with a neighbor. And even though I wanted to leave, I wanted to run, the 17-year-old girl needed my family. I needed to be in a space where I felt like I wasn't alone. And instead, I got sent to the neighbor. And I don't blame her. I mean, there was a lot of chaos, like I said, going on, and people handle things differently in chaos. But that night really impacted me, um, because I felt like I was not important in this family unit situation. And all the focus, and so be it, was on my brother, because my dad's last thing that he did on earth was to save his life and tell him to duck down in the truck because he knew what was coming. So, for me, I was having to go to this neighbor, and this poor neighbor had known my parents forever. So she was trying to wrap her head around what was happening. And my environment changed because my quiet street now was covered in media vans and police cars, and we had helicopters we could hear over the house. And it was crazy, so i I didn't get to grieve by myself. Like, I had no privacy on the grieving process at all. Like, there was always people around, people I didn't know. And I had my boyfriend at the time, who I'm now married to, and he was 19. So we were both children, and we're trying to figure these things out. Like, how do you navigate this? So yeah, it was a huge pivotal time in my life. And yeah,
I want to backpedal to my statement about that you could process it to some degree. And what I meant was when I said that, because I'm a child of loss. My father died when I was a kid, and
you
I had
get that.
trauma after that. Yeah, so I get that. And when people say, oh, children are resilient, they'll bounce back, like that drives me crazy.
Me too.
Yeah. So what I meant when I said that, and I should have said it differently, was as opposed to like a younger child,
Oh
right?
yeah.
You
Oh
have a
yeah.
greater understanding
Yep.
of the weight
Yeah.
of what's happening,
Yeah.
right? Like you don't
Exactly.
really like a child may, like I understood when my dad was dying of cancer. Like and when he died, I knew he died. Like I understood that, like he was gone forever, right? But to understand like the impact that that was going to have the rest of my life, that I couldn't even wrap my head around, right?
Right.
But as a 17-year-old, and you're going into adulthood, and you have an understanding of this is changing everything for me, right?
Yep.
And that's the weight of the trauma and what you witnessed and all of
Yep.
that. Did your brother survive?
He did. He survived. I didn't see him until the next day. What I was told was that he was questioned by police immediately. So he was still at the school when I got sent away. But I didn't get to see him. I could hear him crying in his room, but there was nothing left of me to be able to go and console him. And I just assumed my mom would be there and do it. And he would be surrounded with people because he was so little. Um, so I really didn't see my brother until the next day, and I was able to hug him and, just let him know that I was there for him and I love him. And, you know, dad loved him. And, so, but it was a hard time. It was, my relationship with my mom was not 100% when this happened. We had a strained relationship for many years, and I didn't realize that until I started to write my book. Um, but so when all this happened, my dad was always like the go-between, the mediator, the voice of reason. Um, and now he's gone. And so not only was I processing the fact that my dad was gone, but then I was processing the fact that how was I going to manage that relationship with my mom? So it was just a lot. It was a lot for me. And, I was living, as you well know, with grief, you live in a fog. Um, I was living in a fog. I couldn't sleep. I was total sleep deprivation. Um, and I, unbeknownst to me, I had suicidal ideation. I wanted to be with my dad, and I didn't know how that would happen, but I longed to be with my dad. And I had days where I just couldn't get out of bed. So the depression hit me. My sense of security was gone because they didn't catch the men. So the men who were involved in my dad's murder, um, my dad was a detective. So he had testified that day in one of his criminal court cases. And the guy who was the defendant was out on bail, and it gave him an opportunity. Um, but it took them 6 days to find them. So for 6 days, we had police presence all over our house, front yard, backyard, everything. I had bodyguards. Um, so anywhere I went, I had bodyguards. And it was just crazy, like a whole different world. I had a pretty normal teenage life before all of this, and that was gone. And I had to grow up very, very quickly. Um, so it was just, it was a lot to process, a lot. And I didn't have the tools, you know. I just I didn't have the tools at the time to manage my anxiety. So I always felt like I, even though I wanted to be with my dad, I was always like, I felt like, I'm having a heart attack because the panic attacks and the feelings of it. And I would have to just try to squash them. Most of the time, I would just talk myself out of it. But now I know not to do that because it just extends the attack. Um, but it went on for a while. And and my mom, now that I realize my mom has a narcissistic personality, and so her focus was totally her. And, you know, we all process trauma and grief differently. And she chose to drink. And so that felt alienating to me as well. But that was her coping skill. And I'm not, you know, like I said, everybody deals with trauma and loss differently.
But that's another level of grief, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
your younger brother is growing up in that environment too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. So, it did take him about a month. I was at the point where if you pointed me in a direction, that's the direction I would go. I had no advocacy for myself. I didn't know how to verbalize. I didn't even tell anybody what was going on in my head. And I didn't know how. Um, I had guilt and shame and felt like if I put more on someone else, it was too much. So I just kind of just dealt with it. And my mom came to me about a month after my dad was killed, and she said that the Los Angeles Police Department, the advocate, said that they wanted to put us in therapy. And I didn't know anything about therapy. In fact, in the 80s, I thought if you went to a therapist, you were crazy. But being, you know, subservient, I was like, okay, if that's the direction that you're going to push me, that's the direction I'll go. And I met with this therapist, and his I had this feeling like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the adult. This is going to be the one that's going to help me, that's going to make me feel better, right? But unfortunately, I think that the trauma that I experienced was too much for him. He wasn't what I call trauma competent, and he didn't want to ask the questions, and he didn't. For an entire year, all we talked about every single session was my relationship with my mother, my relationship with my brother, my boyfriend, and school. And that was it.
Not the
And
elephant in the room, huh?
nothing. And people, like, when I tell people that, they go, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, because I think honestly, he was afraid to ask the questions, right? Because maybe he didn't have the answers or he didn't know what to do." So, um,
So
I
he
saw,
never even asked you, are you having thoughts of harming yourself or others?
nope,
Not a once.
not
Yeah.
once. And every session, I'd be like, before the session, I was like, today's the day, today's the day. He's going to figure it out because I was a mess. Like I was a mess, but I just didn't know how to verbalize. Most 17-year-olds back then didn't know how to verbalize our feelings. And most of the time, at Gen X, we were told to,
Suck it up, buttercup.
suck it up, buttercup. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't an open conversation. So an entire year went by, and the last day that I saw him, he looked at me and said, "Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady, and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life, and I don't need to see you anymore." So that was that. And I walked out of that last session thinking, okay, I am so, I've cracked. I've cracked. I'm crazy. I'm just going to have to live with this pain for the rest of my life. Even a professional can't help me. And that was my mindset. I lived in fight or flight from then on. It was just, that's how it was. And, and my boyfriend, he didn't know what to do either. So I struggled a lot. And then on top of that, as the years went on, the time with my mom and living with my mom became very unbearable. I couldn't do it anymore because I watched her spiraling and couldn't do anything about it. And I had this feeling of like, I'm the oldest and this is my responsibility. And I just had to like, I think even back then, I knew a little bit about boundaries without knowing about boundaries. And I just drew a line in the sand and said, that's it. At 18, I'm moving out. I can't do this. And I did it. I moved out.
What did your early 20s, your life look like after that into your early 20s?
Oh, I had some peace being out on my own. Um, Even though my mom told the local police department, so they were constantly driving by my apartment, which, you just can't get away from it. Um, but I married my boyfriend when I was 21. And in hindsight, you know, both of us agree that we were too young to get married. But because we had been together for so many years and we lived with each other for a little bit, that was the next step. But even, all these years, like I was living in fight or flight, so is he. He may not have witnessed what I saw that night, but from the moment I told him that night when he came, because the neighbor called him and told him to come to her house. The minute I told him, that was trauma. He had only known my dad for 3 months. We'd only been dating 3 months. 3 months, and this 19-year-old guy, most guys would have been like, bye bye. This is too much, too much. But he stuck it out. And I think he stuck it out because he knew my mom was going to do what she did, which is kind of turtle within herself. And I needed a friend, I needed some sort of support. And I'm grateful for that, you know. Um, but it's our journey too, and I don't think I would be here if my husband wasn't in my life, especially at that point, you know. So, um, but we've been together almost 39 years now, and it's just nuts to me.
Congratulations.
I mean, we've had our we it's if you
It's
read
not
it in the book,
easy.
you read it in the book, there was a divorce in the middle, but we are together and married in for the second time. But yeah, I mean it's just, grief is a crazy thing because it comes and it goes and um the nice thing about having my husband is that he now knows my triggers. I hate that word, but he knows, and he knows when that's going to send me into the grief, you know. So it's helpful. I have the tools now, but he does too through watching me through the years. And and that's really important.
Well, and I think you raise a good point in that the ripples of grief, it's the impact it has on you, but also, I mean, the people around you, when you don't have the tools, right? And you can combust at any moment or, explode into a fit of rage or anger. The people around you feel like they're living and walking on eggshells.
Yep.
That's the ripples of
Yep.
grief. And so when people think, oh, it's not affecting me, I'm dealing with it, I'm just sweeping it under the rug, I'm not going to talk about it. If you are getting angry about someone not replacing the toilet paper roll or, um, refilling the salt shaker, whatever it is, right? Like these silly things that can make us angry
Yeah.
when we are just, like you said, walking in a fog.
Well,
Just
and
one,
the
it's like these 1,000 paper cuts, right?
exactly. Well, I will tell you, I got really good, and I talk about this all the time. I got really good with wearing my emotional mask. And what that is, when I was young, um, after it happened, people would say things like, "You're strong,
Mm-hmm.
you're brave, you're going to be fine." And that's what I wore. So anytime anything came up, I was like, put on the mask. I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm this, right? But underneath, I was a mess. But what I put out outwardly was something that was different. And so that's why I call it the mask, because nobody can see what all the turmoil is inside. My husband had a way of knowing when that mask was coming on, and that was the difference. Um, but it took me many, many years to get rid of that mask, many, many years. And, 14 to be exact. We were married. We had two children. I had two children. We decided we were going to leave Southern California. I always lived with this safety issue. Um, because it was my dad's death was a planning of his death for months before he died, before they killed him. Um, I always looked behind my shoulder all the time. Nighttime was extremely stressful for me. Um, because my dad was killed at the night, like 5:40. And when we got an opportunity to move to Denver, Colorado, we jumped on it. Um, and we moved in 97. And then I was working as a hairdresser at the time. Um, and I was working at a salon that was close to Littleton, Colorado. And on April 20th of 1999, I was working and I took a break. I went into the back room and turned on the TV, and all the coverage of the Columbine high school shootings were happening. And as I sat and I watched it, obviously my colleagues were having a reaction to it, shock, sadness, all that. But for me, I saw the school, I saw the kids that were my own age, I saw the ambulances, the police cars, and I started to have flashbacks. I turned pale white as a ghost, started getting clammy. I could feel my fingers tingling. I knew it was happening. I was having a panic attack. And I did not tell my colleagues my story, so they had no idea why I was having this visceral reaction. And I didn't either, because I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. And that stuck with me. So as this was all going on, I tried to calm myself down, and then I did what I always did, and I put that emotional mask on. And I went out and I did my clients, and everybody was obviously very upset. But I went about my day like it didn't affect me. The minute I walked through those doors, though, to drive home, all of those emotions came flooding back. And I spiraled. Um, I was terrified now, because now I'm a mom of two small kids. And I wanted to leave this planet. Part of me did. And the other part of me was terrified to leave my children. And this happened for 2 days. And when I got home one day, my husband met me at the door and he said, "You have two choices." Because he knew it was a slippery slope. He knew it. He said, "Either you get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital." And I threw up the white flag and I said, okay, I'll, I'll go to the doctor. And I went to the doctor and a regular physician, and he immediately put me on antidepressants because that's what they do.
Of course they do. They're not trained psychologists or therapists.
No. And then he handed me a card and he said, I want you to make an appointment for this therapist. And I literally laughed at him in his face. And I said, I did this 14 years ago and it didn't help me then. What makes you think this is going to help me now? And he looked at me and he said, you have no choice. You have no choice. So I said, okay, fine. And I made the appointment. And I'm so grateful I did because this therapist specialized in severe trauma and she knew all about PTSD. So in 5 minutes of having a conversation with her, she looked at me and she said, and I described everything I went through at 17 and everything that I was currently dealing with. And she said, Susan, she said, everything you've gone through since you were 17 years old is 100% normal because you have PTSD. And I kind of like sat back in my chair because I was confused. I went, wait a minute. I'm not in the military. I didn't go to war. And she said, well, she said, anyone who has gone through trauma can experience PTSD. But what you need to know is that PTSD isn't something that goes away. It's something you learn to manage. And those words were like, oh my goodness. I always describe it as the sky opening up and rainbows shooting out of him because I felt like I wasn't crazy and I had hope and I had an adult that was going to guide me in this journey and help me heal. And I felt so grateful in that moment. But she had her work cut out for her. Definitely.
Can you hear that noise in the background?
Little bit, not terribly.
1 second.
Okay.
We have some thunderstorm. So
Oh,
my
and your
dog is
dog.
going berserk.
Yep. Let me in, Mom.
Um, thank you for sharing that. And I think one thing that came to my mind as I was hearing you talk about your experience with the PTSD and stuff is, and let me ask you this from what you've learned about PTSD, is it kind of like the pendulum can swing where you're maybe it's like all the cells in your body are just like all at once, like you're it's almost like you're, how do I want to explain this, like your energy is really amped up, or the pendulum can swing the other way where you're completely detached.
Yes.
So Pete, I just want
The
to
answer is yes.
I just want to clarify for people listening who are unfamiliar with the
Yes.
symptoms of PTSD, it doesn't
So,
just look like your experience.
oh yeah. And everybody, like PTSD is not a one size fits all, right? So everybody has different reactions for different things. So for me, for example, anytime there was like a shooting of some sort, um, it would take me right back to that day and all the feelings I had. So the anxiety, I would be extremely anxious and then extremely sad, right? Some people just get very anxious or on edge. Some people just go into a deep depression. Some people become suicidal. Um, there's just a very variance of things that happen to you. Um, and so for myself, when I say she had her work cut out for me, is she decided that it was going to be beneficial to start out small and not overwhelm me. So the one thing that I was struggling with at that very moment is sleep. And if you don't have sleep and you have PTSD, it just exacerbates everything. So she really wanted me to get rest. But I told her nighttime was the worst because, and I'm sure there's people out there that are like, yep, when you start to rest, your brain just turns on. My brain would turn on and would go straight to the darkness. So I would be terrified to shut my eyes because I thought I was going to be enveloped in the darkness and would not be able to come out of it. So she said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to journal at night. And I kind of looked at her funny because I'm like, that sounds a little dumb. Like,
Very
really?
simple too, right?
Right. Yeah, like, really? This is going to make a big difference for me. And she's like, you know what? Just give it a week. I'm going to give you a couple of prompts to write. If you want to write, you can do it through music. You can do it through art. I don't care how you do it, but just get all that stuff out of your head before you go to sleep. And I said, okay. So for a week, I had uh a little tablet next to my bed, and I would write down all the stuff that was swirling around in there on the paper. And at first I was like, oh, but my spelling was wrong. And my was like,
You were
um,
judging it.
yeah. And and I'd call her and she's like, Susan, this isn't a lesson of like English. You just have to write, right? Just like write it. It doesn't matter if it's spelled right. It doesn't matter. Just get it on a paper. I said, okay, fine. So for an entire week I did that. And the crazy thing that happened is I fell asleep. I started to sleep because I was no longer anxious. I was no longer in that, darkness when I slept. And I thought, oh, this stuff works.
And typing it, I'll say this too. I'll just add this for people listening. Handwriting is the key,
Yep.
not typing on a laptop or
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
Handwriting. That's what
Uh,
connects the brain to your heart and soul.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yep. And yeah. So I physically wrote it. I physically wrote it. But like I said, some people can do art. They can draw pictures. They can um, pick up a guitar and start writing a song, like
Mhm.
just singing it out, like whatever you have to do to get it out. And like I said, there's no one size fits all. And so that was the first thing that she started me on. And as we started attacking every single symptom, my next symptom that I dealt with was anxiety. And I had dealt with this forever. And I told her, I said, it's exhausting, physically exhausting to my body to continue to have a panic attack after panic attack after panic attack. So she started to teach me breath work and breathing techniques. And the very first breathing technique that I learned was called box breathing. And I still do it to today.
Yeah.
I actually teach it. So, it was changing my nervous system, and it was changing my state, the state of my being. And so I started to learn as I felt the triggers of anxiety, I would know, okay, first, I got to let it happen. I can't fight it, because when you fight it, it doesn't go away, or it'll stop and then it'll start and then it'll stop and it'll start. So I've got to just tell myself I'm okay. This is going to be all right. I'm going to live through this. And then, so that I don't go into another one, then start the box breathing and really change the state of mind. And so she just kept attacking each thing that I was dealing with. And it was unbelievable. But here's the really important thing that is over and above all, it is the most important thing. And the lesson that I learned was I had to be able to, one, trust her, because I had to be the most vulnerable that I could be in order to do this work. And if I didn't feel that, I wouldn't have healed in the way that I did. And that's really important for people to understand, is that if you go to a therapist, one, they need to be trauma competent. They need to understand your type of trauma and know how to help you heal through it. But you have to have that feeling of safety, of you can be 100% vulnerable and go there with those people and know that they're going to respect you, that they are going to guide you in a way that you need to be guided. So, because I hear a lot people say, oh, therapy didn't work for me. Well, it's because you didn't find the right therapist. Because when you do and the work is done, that's that's when you see the real healing.
Well, in the distinction too, in look at the contrast of the first therapist versus the second therapist. The second therapist was giving you like homework, right?
Yeah.
You had action to take.
Yep.
That's the difference. That's why support groups, if you're not taking action, they don't work.
Yep.
They make you feel better for a short period of time, but it's not long lasting. It's not moving you forward um, in a positive way in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Just like therapy, like talk therapy, continually talking about the same things as you shared, that it makes you feel better for the short period of time, right? But then the
Yep.
next time you're talking about the same things again, right? But I think the difference is action, taking action.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, because she would give me something to do and then ask me, like, how did that affect you? How did you feel after that? Did you feel relief? Did you not? Like, do we need to tweak something? And that's why I tell people it's not a one size fits all. What happened for me and what I used worked for me. It may not work for you. There's so many modalities out there right now, and you just have to find what works for you. And
The
don't be
person that
afraid.
resonates with you or that you resonate with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So, and I tell people, like, you will know in the first 5 minutes of meeting someone, especially a therapist, if you feel comfortable. If you don't, find another one. You know, your healing and your journey is your journey, it's not theirs. And so it's important for you to be your own advocate. And if you feel like you're not getting the right help or you're frustrated because you're not going in the right direction, then find another therapist. It's okay. Everybody has to find their right fit. So,
I'm a certified grief specialist, and what I learned in my training is that, and me personally, my story is that, and maybe you resonate with this, is that trauma happens, but grief is what's left.
yep,
It's the grief that's left.
yep. And you're grieving a lot of different things, like a lot of different things. I mean, for me, I was not just grieving my dad, I was grieving my life, I was grieving my relationship, I was grieving um, my childhood, I was grieving not having a mom in the way that I needed, the support system. I was grieving watching my both of my, my mom and my brother took a different road than I did. Now my brother is doing amazing now, but when he was younger, he took, a rough road. And I was grieving that. I was grieving not being able to be the sister that he needed because I had to put boundaries down, and so there was just the grief evolves actually, as time goes on. You're grieving for different things. Um and so things will come up, and I at this point I have no contact with my mother. And it's okay because what I realized was that that relationship was very toxic. And I spent a lot of time in shame and guilt because I was healing and she was not. And I felt like, as the oldest and as the daughter, that it was my responsibility to help her heal. But what I had to realize, and my book actually helped me realize, is that it's not my responsibility. Everybody is their own individual person. And so, even though she's my mother, it's still her own responsibility for her own life and the choices that she makes. So, um, when I wrote the book, I figured, I was doing this to heal myself, but also in the process of it, because I had so much fear. It was terrifying to be this raw and this vulnerable with strangers and putting it out there. But um, I had fear of safety, repercussions, because I'm putting myself out there. Are these men going to find me, kind of thing? Um, I had fear about, is this going to somehow blow up my marriage again? Because I talk about some very serious things that we went through in the book because it was traumatic. And the relationship with my mom, is it going to open a conversation, or is it going to completely destroy whatever is left of the relationship? And it did the latter. But in all of that fear, I had to find a purpose. Why was I writing this book? Who was it going to benefit? And that's who I put in front of me, the faces of the people that need to hear my message, to know that they're not alone and that other people go through things and they find resiliency through it. Um, Grief doesn't go away, it comes back in weird ways. But when you have the tools to move through it, and the people to look for to help you, support you, it makes a huge difference. And so that was what I did, is I just focused on the people that were out there in the world that needed to hear hope. And and so with it having this effect on my relationship with my mom, I actually feel at peace and I feel okay. And sometimes that is the best thing. Um, and I tell people, if you're in my situation, if you're in that situation, sometimes the best thing for you is to find your peace and protect it.
Well, and make peace with the choice that you made, right?
Yep.
It's making peace with the choice that you made,
Yep. That
choosing to
too.
sever
Yeah.
this relationship, and I'm going to make peace with that.
Yeah. And actually, she's the one that severed it.
Oh, is this
I,
is the loss with your mother? Is that the other loss that you were describing on your website?
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard because that night I felt, and even my brother says the same thing, that we lost both parents because we lost our dad, but my mom lost her identity. And she she just turtled. She to this day, if you meet her, she'll tell you in the first 5 minutes who she is, that she's the widow of my father. Because that's her end all be all, right? That's her identity. And that's fine. And that's the choice that she makes. But I feel like watching that, both of us watching that all these years has been hard because it's like we always wanted my mom to be happy. We always wanted my mom to have this beautiful life, finding love again, finding happiness again. And we
Being a
watched
grandmother.
exactly. And I mean, she has no relationship with my kids.
And that's another layer of grief.
Hmm. So that's, and and I say, like grief comes up in different ways throughout your life. And so now I literally last year realized that my mom was a narcissist. um, and that, narcissistic abuse is very difficult to heal from, but it's something that I'm doing right now. And I'm helping my brother as well, he still has a relationship with her, but I'm trying to help my brother to be, because he always wants to fight her over me. And I'm like, no, you protect your peace. I'm protecting my peace. So, it took me, I'm 55. It took me 54 years to figure this out. And writing my own book and reading my own book and seeing the patterns throughout my life where my mom had opportunities to step up and be a mom and give me the support that I needed. And it didn't happen. And so instead of living my life like having this fantasy that one day my mom is going to wake up and be some Hallmark, holiday mom, I had to let go of that. And that is another grief of letting go of that fantasy. So, yeah, I mean, grief is not something that you heal from it at one point and then it goes away, because there's always going to be things throughout your life that you're going to grieve over. Always. It's just a matter of how you want to do it. So, I choose to learn from my experiences. And in learning, I find the resiliency.
And even if that takes 30 plus years, like it
Absolutely.
did you and me.
Absolutely. It's
Never
like
too late.
there is no timeline. There literally is no timeline. I think that the craziest thing that drives me bananas, and it probably does you too, being a grief counselor, is when people say, oh, it's been X amount of time, get over it, or you should just move on, right? Why is it still bothering you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because you didn't have the relationship with that person that I did. That's just like when someone loses someone dies. I never say, I know how you feel, ever, because I don't. I didn't have the same relationship with that person as the one that's grieving. So
Even you and
saying,
your brother have a
even my
very different
brother,
relationship.
I
Mm-hmm.
tell my brother that all the time. I don't know what it felt like for you. You had a whole different experience than I did. And I would not pretend to know what that feels like. I just know how it felt for me, and the experiences I went through, which is what I wrote in the book. These were my experiences. And um everybody goes, the other thing is that, oh, your trauma is worse than mine. Really? No, it's not. I mean, the story,
Mm-hmm.
the actual situation, yeah, not everybody goes through that. I get that. But everybody's trauma is different. Doesn't mean that it's not important.
There's no
Or one,
hierarchy.
or there's no hierarchy. Exactly. There's no, well, my dad was murdered and you're just dealing with whatever, no, you
Well,
know,
and what people are doing when they do that is they're minimizing their own
yeah,
grief and trauma.
absolutely. And it's crazy because I've had conversations with people that, here's the other side of that, is that I've had conversations with people who have gone through trauma, but because it was an everyday event or an environment that they lived in constantly, they felt like everybody's family was like that. And so it wasn't traumatic what they went through. It wasn't abuse that they went through. And when I bring it to light, um, I had a woman who I was driving for Lyft for a little while last year because I'm a real estate agent now, and real estate was a little funky last year. So, um, first time in 14 years, I had to have a side gig. So I went out and was driving, and I had my book in my car. One of my riders, who was like, why isn't your book in your car? So I
Great
had,
tip.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I had my book in my car, and I picked up this woman, and she pulled out my book and started to kind of read it. And she says, oh my gosh, you went through so much trauma and this and that. And I've never had trauma in my life, but she was going into rehab the next day. And I said, really? And so we started talking about her sobriety. And I said, well, um, first of all, we talked about the fact that this was her third time in rehab, and that she had 3 kids, and that this time she wanted to do it for herself. The other times she did it for her kids, but failed. And in talking more with her, she said, well, I haven't had trauma like you have had trauma. And I said, well, everybody's life is different, and maybe you did and you don't recognize it. And she said, well, when I lived with my mom raised me and my brother. And, my mom was abusive, she yelled and screamed at me and whatever. But she said she had this one boyfriend, and, he would touch me. from the age of 3 to 7. And I was like, touch you? And then she started to elaborate. And this woman was sexually assaulted and molested from the age of 3 to the age of 7. She was made to have relations with her brother. And this was ongoing. And so for her, it was normal. Like this was how you showed love. This is, but then the mom would be jealous when the boyfriend would give more attention to the child, right? And I almost crashed my car at this point because I was like, you don't think this is trauma? I said, here's what I'm going to tell you. What happened to you wasn't your fault. That was his fault. That was her mother's fault. You had adults that did not protect you as a child, did not protect your brother as a child. You 100% went through trauma. And I said, and I don't know how or why, but stuff flies out of my mouth and I go, where did that come from? But what I said was this. I said, if you really want to get sober, that is what you need to attack. Because what you went through was severe trauma. And I said, you have been to rehab 3 times. Have you ever in those 3 times told any of your counselors this story? And she said, no. And I said, this is why it's your fourth. So here's what I'm going to tell you. When you go to rehab tomorrow, and by this time she's like in tears, She's sobbing. And I said, listen to me carefully. When you go to therapy or when you go to rehab tomorrow, please tell your story. Tell your story. Because when you do, they're going to get you the right people. They're going to align you with the right people. Because if you don't attack this now, sobriety is going to be so much harder. And she was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in this lift. And this is what I was like, yeah, but it just, it opened my eyes. It really gave me an aha that there are people that are walking around on this earth who have had experiences that it was so common that they don't even realize that it was traumatic. And
Or no one ever even asks, what are you
right,
trying to cope from?
right,
Like, what happened to you?
right,
That's a very simple question. Even physicians and doctors' offices don't ask that. What happened to you?
right. And, again, it shocked me that she said she went to rehab 3 times. And she said all they did was talk about the sobriety, staying sober, not feeling guilty for, whatever. I get all that. But unless you really attack the true, whether it's abuse or whatever it was, it's harder to get sobriety because down deep, that is what you're hiding from.
Mhm.
I watched my mother do it for years. That's what she was hiding from, was the reality, and hurt people, um, whether it's themselves or the people around them. So I told her, I said, look, with me healing for myself, the ripple effect is it's helped my kids. It's helped my husband. It's helped my brother, right? The people that are open, but um, you have to work on you first. You have to be the priority.
Ever
And
hear a follow-up?
I didn't. And
Mm.
it kills me because I would really love. I sent her with my book. I said, read my book while you're in rehab. Maybe it'll give you some hope and maybe some kind of healing. She didn't want to get out of my car, but I've met many people like that. And I feel like I'm living in my purpose. You probably feel the same way being a grief counselor. Um, I know I've made a difference in people's lives. I've seen it from other writers that I have gotten a follow-up with. Um, but with her, she's always on my mind. Maybe one day, we'll run into each other again. But I really hope that she's able to heal um, all the terrible things that happened to her and how it's affected her mindset all these years, not believing in herself and not, you know, feeling like that's the only way that you can show love with a man, and making wrong choices with men, um, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's important. It's important to make yourself the priority.
So what has your grief taught you?
Oh my goodness. My grief taught me to learn from what I'm grieving about. Um, there are lessons in grief if you pay attention. And so when I feel like I'm grieving something, I look at it a little bit differently and say, why am I feeling this way? What is it that triggered me to feel this way? And what can I learn from it? Because the other side of grief too is that it's the universe trying to teach you something. You gain something out of it.
That's a
One,
really hard thing to hear, at first. I
it
know
is,
I'm
it
sure people
is.
listening to that are like, I didn't
Ah,
ask for this lesson, right?
right. But
It's a,
again,
it's a,
it's all timing.
yeah. Well, and it's all part of our own evolution.
Absolutely. And it is. It's all in timing. It's you know, um what is that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will
Teacher
appear.
appears. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that is 100% real. Um, and yeah, in the beginning, it is hard. It is. And I think in the beginning of grief, like the best thing you can do is take care of yourself. Just the littlest things. Um, just making sure that you're remembering to give yourself love, um and your self support. And that's something I had to learn to do really early on, is I had to figure out, okay, how do I love myself, since I didn't have adults around me that were giving me the support I needed at the time. So I had to learn to do the things. And as a kid, what is that? Oh, well, that's getting my nails done, feeling pretty, getting my hair done, um, spending time with my friends. Just like sometimes it was forcing myself to spend time with my friends because all I wanted to do is sit in my room. But as a kid, you don't know what you're doing anyway. So I was just like, I'm just going to envelop myself with friends and my boyfriend and the things that I know that even though they walked on eggshells around me, they still I could find a little bit of joy in spending time with them. Um, but as an adult, when I tell people when they're going through grief is I know it's hard sometimes, but find something that makes you feel better, even if it's for 5 minutes, whether that's just a good cup of coffee or tea or just sitting outside and feeling the breeze on your face and the sunshine, like, taking a bath, listening to your favorite music, just something that gives you a little bit of comfort.
Or a
And
good cry.
or a good, yeah, scream into your pillow, cry your eyes out. And I think people get really scared, like, oh my God, if I cry, I'm gonna cry for days. Like I'm never gonna stop crying. I'm just it's just not gonna happen, And so I know women who are like, I allow myself to have 10-minute cry and then that's it. I'm like, really? Uh, I think you should just go for it. just just let it all out. And it's okay. Actually, it's a positive. It's not a negative. But, I still think that there's that little myth in the back where people think if I cry, I'm weak. I'm showing weakness. And it's the total opposite. It is so the opposite.
Well, you can get outward attention from your anger, or you can get
Mhm.
outward attention from your tears. Which would you
Ex-
prefer it to be?
exactly. Would you like to go to jail or because I've had those days too where I was like, oh man, I have to rein it in a little bit, find other ways. Um,
And speaking of that, as a mother
mhm.
dealing with all of this, like your children, how old were well, I have two questions. What sparked the idea for the book? Was it the therapy that kind of helped you get to that point? And then also, like, just, the mother you were before you started to do this work and the mother that they have now.
Um, I think that, well, the book, when I turned 50, I was mentally at a place where I knew that telling my story when things came up, I would have the tools to help me get through it. So that's why the book came around because I was like, oh God, I'm 50. I got to get this done. And I honestly feel like it was my dad kicking me in the rear end because he knows what my work is, you know? And my purpose is through him. And so I had this like I drew a line in the sand. I was like, that's it. I'm 50 years old. I'm getting this book done. And it took me 4.5 years to write it. Um, and it's because I did. I had to dive and relive and I had repressed memories come up. All kinds of things happened. It was a journey in itself. As I was writing the book, I feel like as my kids have gotten bigger, and now they're adults. I won't tell you how old they are because it makes me feel old, but they're all adults, and I have three now. And, I think they see the resiliency. They see that I've had these days where I've been so sad. They've seen my sadness. I never hid it from them. I never, think the only time I hid any of my emotions is when my husband and I were divorcing. And there was just a lot. And I was really trying to be the supportive parent through that. And I felt like they needed to see a strong mom. They needed to see a supportive mom. And so my closet saw all my tears and heard all the bad words and you name it, right? And but my husband as well was very you know, very loving, or tried to be as loving as possible through everything with them. He was going through his own stuff, his own mental stuff. Um but as they've seen me progress and they've seen me heal, my kids struggle with their own mental health things. And they have a mom that can help them through their own struggles. They have a mom that was a big proponent of them getting therapy and finding the right therapist. So I was able to utilize my own experiences even with my own kids and making sure that they were going to be okay, no matter what. So I think that was the biggest thing. I wanted to leave a legacy for my kids of, you can go through horrific things in your life and you can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to rise up and be a survivor. And my hope is that I'm teaching my kids to be survivors.
You had mentioned that you gave your closet all your tears and you wanted to be the strong mom. And I imagine that comes from your own personal experience of with your own mom, right?
Yep.
One thing I want to highlight for listeners is that um, I think had there's a difference between um, I think there's a distinction that needs to be made. There's a difference between being strong, but also allowing yourself to grieve with your children and showing them how to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, that goes back to what you shared. Like you learn to like put your mask on and what happens is children learn that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We learn that.
Yep.
Either and it can go the pendulum can swing both ways, right? I had a similar experience. There wasn't room for my emotion because there was so much from my mom. Same for you. Like there was like I agree that my mom died the day my dad died, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so there wasn't room for my emotion. So I had to be strong to I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to upset her, right? And so I think you can be in a situation like that where you either learn to put the mask on or you learn how to grieve in a healthy way. And a part of that involves showing vulnerability, showing tears,
Yep.
talking about what you're experiencing,
Yep.
having space and room for everyone's feelings and emotions.
Yep. Well,
So, what would you do differently now? Right?
yeah, I mean, I think the funniest story for me was I was speaking. My kids had never, um, they've never really heard my story from my perspective before. And I invited them in 2019. I was a keynote speaker, and I wanted to have my kids there. Um, so they came to watch me speak. And I had asked my middle son to video me. Um, and so I did my talk, and I came off the stage, And my kids were just like blown away. And they were like, I've never heard I've never heard it like that before. I've never, like, oh my gosh, like they didn't know what to say. But my middle son said, I said, did you get anything on, and he goes, Mom, I got so caught up in your story that I forgot to record you. I'm so sorry. And I was like, it's fine. It, because for me, it was like, okay, that sucks. But you know what? It was so much more important for my kids to be a part of that experience and to hear my story from their own mother, from my own lips, and to see where I was and how far I've come. Because I felt like that was a really important lesson for them to learn as young adults. And um, they have been on this journey with me. And I think I have such a close relationship with my children. And even I have a stepson. Um, I have a really great relationship with him. He is my kid. Another woman just had him. Um, I've been blessed to be able to have this experience with my children and teach them exactly how to grieve, and that it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to show your emotions. And it's not a weakness, and I'm here for you, and your dad is here for you. And we have always been very, very much about showing support for our kids, not only our kids, but my friends make fun of me because they say I collect children, not in a weird way. But generally, kids who have challenging home lives themselves, who don't find the support system themselves, have found my husband and I as secondary parents. And I feel like that's all coming and stemming from my own experiences and making sure that other kids have the support that they need. And so now those kids are getting married and they're having children, which is giving me grandchildren, non-biological grandchildren. But they see me as a positive person in their lives, and I am so grateful for that. So grateful for that. That they too have read my book and said, wow, like when you say to me that you're going to get through this, or when you say to me those times where you say, just let it go, or if you're feeling, depressed, here's some things that maybe might help, or whatever, you get it. You literally get it. I said, yeah, I'm not just pulling this out of the sky, folks. Like I'm taking my own, my own experiences and my own lessons learned, and just helping you, like almost like giving you and they don't even know what this is, but um cliff notes. Like most kids are like, cliff notes, what are cliff notes? I'm like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. If you were around in the 80s, you know what a cliff note is. So yeah, I mean, and I think that, as adults, and adults who have gone through things or have felt things or have, you know, I feel like it's important for us to impart our wisdom, our positive wisdom onto the younger generations, because I feel like they have, personally, I feel like they have a lot more on their plate than even we did. The difference is that there is talk of mental health.
Mhm.
And there is a lot known about PTSD, and there is a lot of conversation around trauma
And
and
so
grief
many free tools and
and loss. Yes,
information, and
absolutely.
it's
So
so much more accessible.
it is accessible. It's just, people still need that little nudge, you know.
Yeah, you don't want to DIY your trauma and your
No,
pain.
no. You still need the
Because
nudge.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's, you're only, like you said earlier, I think, and I did it too, like you're only extending the suffering by
Yep.
not bringing in the support that you need to move
Yep.
forward. And
Yep.
that, we don't know what we don't know. And there's other
Exactly.
people that know a little bit more and are a little bit further along. And those are
Yeah.
the people you want to seek out. So
Yep.
thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared. Is there anything that you didn't feel like you got to share?
Oh my goodness. No, I think this was great. I mean, I hope. I'm putting it out there. I'm throwing that energy out there that there's someone listening who, I just want you to know that you're not alone. You're not. And that there are people out there that care about you, and that, there are resources available to you. And I'm out there. I'm accessible. I am open to talking to anyone. Heck, who knows if you're sitting in my Lyft ride, what you're gonna get. um, but I just hope that someone out there is able to resonate or connect with this conversation, and it just shows them that there is hope and there is healing
It
that
is
can
possible.
happen.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have dove into the divorce and the reconnection. But I
Oh my
suppose
Lord.
myself and everyone else will just have to read the book, because I'm assuming that's in the book.
Yep.
Okay. Pick up the book if you want to know more on that, or scope out all our other podcast interviews, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, no, I talk about it more in the book than anything else, you know. Because the divorce is the divorce. The lessons out of it is what's important.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much again. And I will put links to the book, your website, your Instagram in the show notes. I'll also find a really good box breathing YouTube that I can add in there
Yeah,
to support
absolutely.
people.
Yep,
And yeah,
that'd
thank
be
you again.
wonderful. And did you say the name of the book? I don't remember if you did or not.
I believe you did The Other Side of the Gun.
Yeah, The Other Side of the Gun, My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency. Yep.
Yep. And I'll put the link in the show notes for that.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome.
And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.